Let's start, as we did before, with a self-identification, your name, what you do, and then we'll move on from there.
Yeah, my name is Mark Pisano. I'm a school psychologist in Department of Defense schools
And that puts you where geographically?
in North Carolina,
And on particular bases, or?
Fort Bragg.
Okay. And is in that regard, are you primarily focused on schools that are within the boundaries of the base, or does it have more of a regional?
Yeah, we have our own school system at Fort Bragg, and all of our schools have only children with parents of active duty.
So you know
military.
what their challenges are, these kids, more than probably any psychologist.
Yeah, I've been there
around.
3 decades.
3 decades.
Yeah.
Have things changed in that regard in terms of what you do?
No, my role has been the same, although I would say that as the years have gone on, there have been more and more emergence of behavioral issues and behavioral concerns with our kids.
So what are some of those behavioral issues, and when do they come up?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it has to do with just the regular stressors of a deployment, with kids missing their parents as they're deployed. Some of the characteristics that we might see from these children would be lack of attention, or perhaps some withdrawn behavior, grades dropping, those kinds of things. And the caution that I would give to the teachers and to those working with these children is to be cautious about assuming that it's attention deficit disorder, because many of the same characteristics we'll see from children with attention deficit, where they're not attending, or they're appearing lackadaisical, or the focus just isn't there, or they don't care about their grades, or they'll choose to be more withdrawn during recess or other social activities, which is a lot of what attention deficit kids do.
So what the kids are going through, what the kids are manifesting when their parents are deploying could look like ADHD.
Very much so, very much so. And I think that therein lies the challenge, not only for mental health providers that are going to be seeing these children, but also for school employees, counselors, teachers, and psychologists working with these children, not to jump to the conclusion that they've got a child in their classroom that's attention deficit, and when what they've really got is a child who's all of a sudden experiencing a parent deployment.
Do you find that kids want to talk about it when their parents go overseas and it's affecting them?
Some do and some don't. What I've done with my schools is provided a deployment group. I really call it a deployment support group, where kids, if they choose to, can come and sit, have lunch with other kids who are going through a deployment. And what I can do is kind of lead discussion, and we have talk about when was the last time you talked with your dad or your mom, depending on who's deployed. And some of them really look forward to that. So we'll offer opportunities for them to talk if they choose to.
What's the overlap between a kid's academic performance and a deployment? His mom or dad goes overseas. Can you see the impact of that in what he's doing in school?
There's research both ways that will report some grades drop, some kids don't. It really depends on how that child is managing. And some kids manage well and some kids don't. And I will mention this. 9 times out of 10, if we're seeing a youngster really struggling through the deployment, the non-deployed spouse is also struggling. So if the non-deployed spouse is having a hard time with the deployment, a lot of times it just shows through the child in the school system. So therein lies a double concern, providing support not only for the child, but also for that non-deployed spouse.
So is that the school's business, that the spouse is having a hard time?
It's not the number one concern. The children are, but that wouldn't mean we couldn't, which we do at Fort Bragg, is to provide parent support groups, which I do every year, and invite parents to come in, and I will run at lunchtime, again, some groups to support parents with the things that they're dealing with.
Mark, there are kids everywhere in every school whose fathers might go away for a long time, or whose families break up because of divorce and one parent becomes absent as a result of that. But the kids we're talking about when the mother or father goes away for a long time, it's often to go away for a long time to a place where they might get killed. It's a war.
Right.
It's a combat zone. How does that change this whole dynamic?
I think the dynamic changes because of the threat, and the threat is there all the time. Now, with multiple deployments, and we're having more and more soldiers being deployed, there's a belief that in the civilian ranks, that the more deployments a family experiences, the easier it gets for them.
Not true?
And that's not true. And that's a myth that I would really come to share with those listening, that with multiple deployments comes more depression and more fear.
So it gets worse the more it happens.
It does, in the sense that here's another chance that our husband or father won't come back alive, or mother. With those initial deployments, those families going through their first or second, they're learning what their new roles and responsibilities are going to be. Now, those families that have been through 4 or 5, I know families that have been through 8 deployments, they know what the new roles and responsibilities are going to be once the soldier is deployed, because they've done it before.
Mm-hmm.
But the level of depression sets in, and it gets higher, and it increases, because it's the soldier being gone and being missed, but then also that just not knowing whether or not they're going to come home alive, or come home injured, or come home with any sort of post-trauma.
The danger is a critical part of what the kids have to live with.
It is, and there's a lot of pride in these military families.
What does that mean?
They're very proud of who they are.
But I mean, by what it means, I mean, and what is the impact of that pride?
The impact of the pride is strength, and I think what it does is it gives these families strength to, with pride, know that even though the non-deployed spouse and the parent and the children aren't being deployed, but they're serving their country as a military family, and they're again trying to stay the best they can connected with the soldier that's deployed, but the level of resilience is truly, truly remarkable in many, many of our families.
In the context that we're talking about, where you're talking to teachers who haven't experienced this, that's basically, initiates to this whole process. There are two ways we can go with this. I think we should go in both of them. There's sort of, what should they know? What should they look for? And then there's, what should they do? But let's take the first part. What should teachers who have never, as far as they know, taught a kid whose mother or father was overseas in a war zone, what should they look for in the kid?
Well, here's the challenge I would pose to those teachers. I would ask them to please become intimately familiar with the deployment cycle.
Meaning?
Meaning understand what pre-deployment is, understand what deployment is, understand what R&R is, and understand what the reintegration process is all about. If they can do that, they will be more in tune with what the child is experiencing. And here's what I want these teachers to be able to say. I want them to be able to go up to these children and say, I know what you're going through, you can count on me. And if they can do that, then that gives that child a sense of support, not being alone. And I'm talking about those kids in Guard and Reserve families, not so much the Department of Defense kids who are with students that have parents deployed all the time. The bigger concern in this situation would be those Guard and Reserve children that don't have any friends, that have a clue what they're going through because they don't understand what it's all about. But if their teacher, who all children view their teacher as a superhero, can say to them, I know what you're going through, you can count on me.
But for a teacher to say, I know what you're going through, it means the teacher needs to know something about what the child is going through. So teachers have to educate themselves about this thing called the deployment cycle.
The deployment cycle.
And what does that term refer to?
It's a global terminology for the beginning to the end of the soldier's deployment.
Meaning there are stages, there's a calendar for that soldier.
There's a chronological order of 4 steps, 4 major steps. And let's look at those. The first is the pre-deployment stage, which is With special operations soldiers and service members, could be a few days. More typically, it's a month or so where soldiers know that they're going to be deployed. And they know their assignment, they know where they're going, and they've got a certain number of weeks, usually about 4, to prep, get their gear, learn their assignment, review with their peers what it is that they're going to have to do. And during that stage, we are finding children very anxious. So when they come to school, that's when they may say to their teacher, "My daddy's getting ready to go." And there are things that the families need to do to prep the child for the deployment, which would include the soldier spending intimate time with the child, perhaps reading a bedtime story with the child on videotape. So once the deployment occurs, the child can watch that videotape every night before they go to bed to keep connected. Next, the second stage would be the deployment stage, which is the actual physical departure of the soldier. And honestly, quite honestly, brutally honestly, when that time comes, sometimes it's a relief for the family because there's been so much prep, so much anxiety, so much, at times, discord in the family because of the stress with the deployment, that once the soldier leaves, there's just a big gasp for breath. Everybody just kind of brushes the dirt off their shoes and they're ready to go and start their life now without the soldier parent being home. I've had parents say that it's actually a relief to see them leave because there's just so much building up to that point.
It's so counterintuitive for people who haven't lived through it.
That's right. But when the child comes to school right after the soldier parent leaves, there will be upwards of 1 to 2 weeks of very difficult times with the child getting used to the parent not being there, and for that matter, the non-deployed spouse.
And can you see that in the classroom?
We do, and again, it manifests itself with those typical ADHD characteristics where the child seems withdrawn, the loss of focus. Some of the children aren't sleeping well when this happens, so children will appear tired in class, or appetite ranges where the child won't eat or they will overeat. Lots of things, sleep patterns.
So you're saying it looks a lot like ADHD, but it's not ADHD.
Exactly. So the deployment stage. And let me mention this too. We've had deployments upwards of 15, 16 months with the Army. That is changing now, where we've got deployments are going to draw back and scale back to 12 months. So the reason the Army is doing that is because we've got these multiple deployments at 15 and 16 months. Since these soldiers are being deployed so much, what the Army's going to do is reduce the amount of time to 12 months. So deployments now, of which we're expecting quite a bit in January, will be more 12-month deployments than 15 or 16 months. So during that period, midway through the deployment period is something called R&R, fondly referred to as R&R, which is rest and relaxation. And this is a period where the soldier returns home for 2 weeks, usually 2 weeks from being in theater, and spends those 2 weeks with his or her family. And during this time, it's a reconnection opportunity.
Does reconnection happen?
Reconnection happens, but what's interesting about that 2-week period is you've got a family who's been functioning usually well without the soldier parent being there. Everybody knows who does the trash, everybody knows who does the cooking, everybody knows who the disciplinarian is, who's writing the bills, etc. So soldier parent returns. What's now their role? Where do they fit in to the family routine? And that change and that transition for that 2-week period is very demanding and very stressful. And it's a happy time because everybody's back together, but with the demands of putting the family back together again, there's a renegotiation.
But I can completely see how this impacts the returning soldier, this complicated reconnection. But how does that affect the child?
Some confusion because up until the return of the soldier parent, whenever the child wanted permission, always went to the non-deployed spouse. Okay, both mom and dad are home now. Who's who's going to have the say-so?
So that can be confusing for a
It
kid.
can be. Who do I ask? If I don't get the answer I want from dad, I'm going to mom, and vice versa. The other thing is, there's the children and the non-deployed spouse never know what they're going to get when the soldier returns. Depending on what the soldier's been through, they may have some post-traumatic stress. They may have a physical injury. They may have some other emotional problems that they have gained after experiences of being in theater. So there's some confusion prior to the soldier returning. And then once the soldier returns, and this is what I really try to